I'm a college student, like Quincy over here. I go to UW Parkside. I'm an iOS and Android developer at the App Factory. I like to call myself a programmer with some design skills. So what I mean by that is I understand the Apple human interface guidelines. I've read it a few times over, and I've also read Google's material design spec a few times over. I usually mock up all my apps beforehand with Illustrator. So instead of before I code, I always spend at least a few weeks just mocking stuff up in Illustrator or Sketch now, and I communicate with the clients with that. So I wouldn't call myself a full-on designer, but I would say I'm a programmer who understands the design behind the platforms I work on. So just real quick, this is mock-ups in the past 3 weeks. Nothing too complex, just it gives me a gauge of what I'll be doing later when I start coding. So before I talk about the iOS 10 design changes, I'm going to talk about how we got there. So I'm going to start from the original design ideas behind the original iOS 1 all the way up until iOS 6. So as we're all aware, skeuomorphism was king in the first iterations of iOS. So a terrible example is the old Game Center. It has this delicious felt background and a little wood board at the top. This is the extreme end of what skeuomorphism was in iOS, but it gives you an idea what it was like. But the reason for this was iOS was new when it first was released. It was the first touch-sensitive operating system, really, at least for the mainstream. So they had to make it as familiar as possible. So buttons look like buttons, knobs look like knobs, etc. But over about 6 years, users learned how to use a mobile operating system. So they no longer really needed to have this relatively way too much fluff. I mean, they didn't need all these drop shadows and all the extra time it took for designers to mock these things up. So skeuomorphism became stale and it became really dated. Then Android started pulling ahead with its more flat designs, and iOS just needed to do a 180. So that's what iOS 7 was. It was a complete 180 on Apple's design. So it stripped iOS design to its core. So no longer were there drop shadows or even borders around buttons. Things were flat. Things were colorful. There was a lot of whites. The borders and buttons were removed. And minimalism and an emphasis on content was the new philosophy behind iOS design. But this brought about severe accessibility problems. I'm pretty young, but which of you here have trouble reading on your phone sometimes? Some of you do? Okay, cool. I didn't realize it was much of a problem, but my aunt, 3 months ago, I noticed that she was using reading glasses to use her phone. And I knew about the setting where you could turn up the font size and put borders and buttons, so I did that so she no longer had to use reading glasses. But apparently, well, first we all know the font's pretty thin, but it's enough of a problem where a decent amount, she's 40, she's not that old, but she's old enough where she can't read things like she used to. So it posed a significant accessibility problem for too many of the users. So I quick threw up this line chart. Where does iOS 10 sit? So let's think of this like this is extreme skeuomorphism and this is extreme minimalism. iOS 10 is like a quarter of the way to the left of extreme minimalism. I'll show you why, but it's about here, it's about there on accessibility. It's not quite skeuomorphic or anything, but it's still readable. So if you've downloaded the iOS 10 beta, you've been graced with the redesign of Apple Music, Apple Maps, Apple Home. Home it's called, right? And it looks kind of like this. It uses this really blocky black fonts for a lot of things. And for example, the new playback control is like 2.5 times larger. So iOS 10 has this whole new attitude on fonts. They have big, bold, beautiful buttons and embrace of more card-like things. Legibility seems to be more important than minimalism was, and accessibility is the new focus. That's it. To give a quick quote, Connor Mason from Chicago and Punch Kick Interactive is a great quote. He says that iOS 10 is the good sort of skeuomorphic design, apps that don't look like leather-bound books or tape decks, but that instead give user cues about interactivity through physicality and animation. That's a pretty cool quote. So, a quick example of what this difference looks like. This is the onboarding screen for Apple News in iOS 9, and this is the onboarding screen for Apple News in iOS 10. You can see exactly what I'm talking about. This is the old ultralight Helvetica Neue font. You see it's been completely replaced with the new black variant of the San Francisco font. And as well, they've also replaced these text-looking buttons with one actual button-looking button with a pill shape. You probably had trouble reading this from here, right? But you have no trouble reading this, right? So that's the idea behind it. And yeah. Another look at what the new changes are. This is the redesigned Apple Music app, and this is the old one. Obviously, the title at the top is now far thicker. They replaced the navigation bar completely. It's just the floating edit button now, and the playback controls down here are about 2.5 times larger. So they can even fit an album bar on there now. So there's really 3 new aspects to the iOS 10 changes: there's buttons, the new fonts, and the cards. We'll talk about buttons first. So like I said before, iOS 6 and earlier have relied upon glossy buttons modeled after physical objects. When buttons in iOS completely stripped that to its core and just made them just text labels, right? But this yielded countless examples of buttons looking too much like regular text, right? So you wouldn't know if that's a button unless it's colored, and just because the text is colored doesn't really mean it's a button. So it made things too confusing. So many iOS 10 buttons now look like buttons. So who here does not like Apple Maps? There's reasons for it. Can you tell from a glance that this is the button to start navigation? Probably not, right? Not really. So one of the reasons I didn't use Apple Maps is it wasn't as intuitive as Google Maps. This is actually the button to start it. It kind of looks like it's displaying meta information that says that it's 45 minutes away. It's not really obvious. This is actually the button how you actually navigate there. So they fixed that, and now it's just this giant pill button. So it's pretty obvious that it's the button to start navigation. It's also much easier to hit if you were driving. Obviously, you're not supposed to do it while you're driving, but if you're distracted, there's no way you're going to find this button. Another quick tidbit, you can also see a difference in fontage. So this is the old ultralight font, and now this is the new blacker San Francisco font they're using. Old iOS also got this weird and headache-inducing idea of putting white thin text on something that's dim or translucent. It's kind of hard to see. It makes your eyes hurt. So they fixed that with doing actual contrast. You can actually read it, and I think it's a huge improvement. So speaking about readability, fonts have been redone. So in iOS 9, Helvetica Neue has been switched with San Francisco, which is an in-house Apple-developed font. It was developed originally for the Apple Watch because it's a blockier variant. Because the Apple Watch things need to be more glanceable, but they ported over to iOS 9, and now it's of course here in iOS 10. But they also released a new black variant of it for iOS 10, which is basically just a really big blocky variant, which you see here, here, and here in the new redesigned Apple News app. Clearly taking up a lot of space, much less of a concern. If this was, for example, I'll give you an example. This is the old Apple News app. This is the redesigned one. There's a lot more space for text here, but they have definitely prioritized being highly scannable over space. Here's another example of the new blocky font. This is just every scene in Apple Music. Every single scene is now headed with, instead of the navigation bar title, it's just this giant 30-point font, black San Francisco font. So real quick, I don't know how many of you are aware, but the San Francisco font actually has two variants. It has display and text. Text is actually San Francisco below 19 points, and display is 20 points and above. The text is actually slightly bigger, slightly bolder than the display version is. If you're using the default Apple font, it'll switch these out for you as you change the size of your font. But the idea behind it is if your font is smaller, it needs to be a bit bolder to be read. But if it's bigger, it could be a bit thinner. If you're close up here, you can kind of see it, but it's just more tweaks to make things more accessible for people who can't read. The last aspect I'll be talking about is the new cards. If you've used iOS 10, you're aware of the notification center having the new cards for notifications. I like to call them cards. The Apple Maps app also utilizes one card. When you click a location, it swipes up this one large card. A card is just a rounded rectangle with a translucent background, and then the views behind the card are always dimmed, which creates a sense of depth. The old UI alert view, the thing that pops up as an alert, that's what the card looks like. It's just now used throughout the operating system. This is what it looks like. In the Apple Maps app, one large rounded card swipes up. Behind it's dimmed, it's translucent, and then this is the new notification center cards. And this is how it looks in Control Center. I think this is a good example of iOS 10 design. Not only are the buttons bigger, which is an idea of iOS 10, but also they have this new poppier background color, and it's all encased to one card with other sub-card things in here. Also in HomeKit, it also uses this new pill-shaped translucent card in many places. So on to implementation. There isn't really too much to talk about here. If you're not mocking up new designs, or you're not a designer, the programming is pretty easy. Just use the default font on iOS 9 above. For the buttons, just set the background color. And then if you want to give it that pill shape, just change the corner radius and the layer of the UI button. So just button.layer.cornerRadius equals 2. It's pretty easy. And then the most complex thing here is the replacement of the navigation bar for a scene's title. So, example back here. So I mean, yeah. So you can see this is how most iOS apps usually have this. Just set the title on the navigation bar, and it was pretty easy to do. It was just always exactly 20 points down within this 44-point navigation bar. Now in many places they hide the navigation bar and have this blocky text, this text label that sit below it. So you would need to configure exactly where that would be. It would take a bit more auto layout code, but not too complex either.
Real quick, on one of your next slides, you talked about the corner radius on the button layers. It looks like there might be sort of a standard corner radius that Apple's using in a lot of this stuff. Have you run across any numbers on
I think it's 2.
2?
That's what I said 2. Yep, I'm pretty sure it's 2, just looking at it. But you should probably find that out. But I'm pretty sure it's 2, just looking at it.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's noticed that the rounding for almost all of these, from the button to the card, it's all the same amount of roundness. So they got to have a standard there. I'm pretty sure it's 2 though. And critical analysis, what do I think about it? I like it. I don't think it looks as good, but you can't deny that it's much easier to read. Scanning is faster. Hitting tap targets is less annoying, especially if you're driving the Apple Maps app, for example. The main downside is all the extra space that is taken up by the enormous blocky font that takes up a fifth of the screen. And then some design-focused users may also miss the ultra-light fonts and the extreme minimalism. But besides that, obviously Apple is focusing on accessibility and reducing headaches over a super pretty edgy UI. Which makes sense. If you're Apple and you you sell products to literally everybody, and your default settings need to work for every user. So that's kind of what iOS 10 is trying to do here. That's it. Cool. Any questions?
Do you personally like the changes?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think it looks good, but I'm pretty sure that it'll solve a lot of the readability issues. So that's got to be better than not looking as pretty.
So what do you think of the adoption by third-party developers of the new aesthetic?
I think I would personally do it. So, but of course, it's up to the developers. Apple usually updates the human interface guidelines the day that the OS is released. Obviously, they have a new way of doing things, so they're updated to emphasize these new changes. But
sure, but do you think sort of established apps on the App Store are likely to do a significant redesign for the larger fonts and some of the new styling?
if you have a native Apple app and you try to look as native as possible and you care about that, then I would say yes.
Oh.
But if you have a custom UI, probably not.
Okay.
So
something like Spotify is probably less likely to.
yeah, Spotify probably wouldn't. But I can see Facebook doing it, Twitter doing it. They have very native look to it.
Yeah.
I would do it because I try to stray as close as possible as native,
Yeah.
just to make things easier. So, of course, we only have 3 apps right now that have the same look. Obviously, they're going to be probably updating the rest of them, but and it's not. This is not just us inferring stuff. Apple designers have talked on Twitter about this stuff. You can look at their comments online, and they echo all this stuff. So.
So, what are some other people's thinking on the new design and design guidelines?
I think like what he mentioned about the buttons being easier to hit when you're driving. Well, I didn't have no problem with the 44-minute and the little car. For me, that was fairly intuitive, but perhaps because we're all accustomed working with iPhones, but I can see how my grandma will never find it, or maybe even my sister that she's not related or doesn't work with things like this so often. So I can see how that big button with get directions can be a lot more convenient. I really don't have a lot of, I don't have an eye for design perhaps, much like some more developers. So sometimes I tend to go to what works and what's already there. So I guess because this is what works and it's already here now, I'll start, pushing the changes that I can to be more similar to the new stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't mind the minimalistic at all. Like I really enjoyed it. I did bought the biggest iPhone because it was smaller and I wanted to have, be able to read it better. So I guess, that kind of also speaks to the fact that there was an issue perhaps with things being too small. So I needed more space to read it better. But I feel like it's going to bounce back to minimalist probably into new releases, how it can go back and forth.
So speaking of bouncing back, this is clearly a response to them stepping forward too much. But, this is kind of a very dramatic step. It's hard to deny that this is quite blocky. So they went from being extremely thin to probably as blocky as they can get.
Yeah.
Right? But, if they probably did user studies, right? So they probably got a bunch of people and compared every size possible, and they've found the size that they're comfortable with the most amount of users using. So
Yeah, I have to wonder about that though, because wouldn't they have done that in iOS 7?
Right.
you would think.
I think what they do is on purpose, and this is me being a little cynical, is they go back and forth like this because they got to have something to do to come out when iOS 11 comes out that wows everybody. I agree. I think that it looks cheap to me, but more functional.
Yeah.
I think they should have gone somewhere in the middle, but we'll probably see that in 11 or 12.
Yeah. And I'm sure eventually we'll see that really, what do you call that first design? like the one.
Skeuomorphic.
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna go
iOS
back to
design.
that extreme, but I'm sure at some point we're gonna see it again. Like,
I actually didn't think that was always a terrible thing. Like I liked it on my notes app, having the ruled lines on there
sure.
and stuff. I didn't think it really added much, but it didn't take away anything. I liked kind of the candy looking progress bars and buttons. Again, I don't think it was good or bad. It's more of a preference thing.
Right.
So
So I think iOS 7's extreme minimalism was a result of Johnny Ive having too much control. I think after Steve left, he was the last Messiah, and I think that he just had too much influence at the time, and no one was talking down.
I think he's
That or
overrated.
because Forstall was out.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, immediately after he left, and he was the one who. So that terrible Game Center look, that was iOS 6 when Forstall was kind of still running things, and it was too much. You can all agree. I think that was just too much. So they just took the negativity gem from that, just
I think it,
bounced
you know,
back.
like you said earlier in your talk, it served its purpose. It let people dip their toes in the water and get comfortable. So
Yeah.
And one of the things that Apple has pushed over the last few releases of iOS is the stuff with like UIKit dynamics, and instead of using things like drop shadows, using what's the other thing that they do? It's not the UIKit dynamics, but it's something where you like set the distance off the background, so it gives the parallax effect when you tip the phone.
Pretty sure it's called parallax.
Is that what it is? No, I'm thinking like what's the
Visual effects, or whatever they're called.
visual effects are like the
Different ones.
like blur and vibrancy effect kinds of things.
Okay, parallax is a different one then.
Yeah.
You're talking about when they had those backgrounds when they came out with whatever that color body phone was.
I mean,
They
right
had
now,
a
like if you go
background
to
that was
if you go to your
sensitive
home
to the-
screen and you
tilt
like
it.
tip the
Yeah.
phone,
Yeah.
there's a little bit of a parallax effect. So that was something like right when iOS 7 came out that they were starting to push that as an alternative to using drop shadows. So they've still been talking about that. They talk about it a bit less. I don't know if it's because they actually think designers and developers should use it less, or if it's just that a lot of developers don't end up using that stuff.
Yeah, so I think I think this is good a sense of depth. So what they do now, I think, is just to
Yes,
have,
thank you.
it's just to dim the background and make it translucent so you can see through it.
Yeah.
I mean, that looks like it's layered on top without using a drop shadow. So
Yeah, so the
I think that
background,
works.
the background of the control center itself, though, it has a vibrancy effect. So where it's got the blur, the tint.
I heard somewhere too that the parallax was causing people to get motion sickness or something, so maybe that's why they toned it down when iOS 7 first came out. Like, so we're getting a vertigo effect from it.
Took up a lot of battery power. Too. People would turn it off like right away because their battery would die right away.
Yeah, I can see that.
I was also wondering if part of the reason some of the bigger text, I think, was in iOS 8 introduced the dynamic text, or was that iOS 7?
I would say.
7.
And I know I haven't personally
Right,
taken
is-
advantage of it, even though it's always been on my list. I just never got around to it in all my apps. Take advantage, but it seems like maybe either people weren't finding the feature or developers weren't using it enough, because it seems like some of the different layout, just bigger text could have been solved with a few of the things that I wouldn't have solved the button issues. But
So using dynamic text, which is introduced in iOS 7, allows you to use the setting to up the font size. So when I did that for my ad, obviously the developer, it was actually the iMessage app she was using mostly, but they clearly use dynamic text to do that behavior.
We've wanted to use the dynamic text stuff in a number of the apps that we've worked on. The trouble that we've run into is we work with some very particular designers, and they don't like the text size changing. So
Yeah,
changes the layout. Yeah, that's kind of the point. So yeah, and what you were saying earlier about the accessibility.
Yeah, so
I mean,
the idea is accessibility over design now.
yeah. So I mean, for me, I run my stuff with the the normal small font size, but like if I'm going down the road and need to glance at something and get some information out of it, it is difficult to read stuff. And I'm not saying like while I'm driving. It could be like while I'm walking around if I need to look and get a phone number or something.
Seems like it would be a lot better for passive learning and passive use, and that's the whole idea of the native iOS apps. I mean, I'm sure there's something to pull away from both what they did in iOS 7 and what they're doing in iOS 10. When you're doing something specific, 10 works great when you're actually supposed to be paying a lot of attention to it. But if you're doing a big button that you press all the time, iOS 10.
So I think it depends on the type of app. So if you're using Apple News, do you need this much blockiness? I mean, you're probably not going to be reading the news while walking or driving. So I don't know if it needs to be this blocky. But if you're driving, I think it needs to be more scannable. So in situations where you're probably not going to be spending too much time looking at your phone, bigger font size. But if you need to read a lot of content, like it's what a news app is, it's consuming as much content as possible, I'm not sure that it needs to be quite that big. It's been big.
When you were when you had the Apple Maps up, it looked like from their old design that it was never even really intended to the screen that you would use to navigate to that location, but people wanted to use it that way, so they adapted how people used it. I don't know. That's just my opinion.
That's how I use it. So.
I mean, for me, when I look at that, being a developer, I think, oh, that's a UI table view, so I'm just going to tap on a row. So I'm not necessarily looking for a button there.
Right. That's kind of
Yeah, the row over, you have to hit that card.
Yeah.
You even confused us. So.
Yeah.
I mean, I might be confused, but wasn't Google Maps on the computer the one that had the little bus, the little car, and the little person, and then you would tap on one of them, and they would give you the route? Because I don't remember ever having an issue with the car. Like, it was right away very clear, and I don't think it's because Apple made it really clear in my mind. I think because Google made it really clear in my mind. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, I was already used to like, well, I'm gonna drive there, so car, it's of course the only option for a button. Although it clearly doesn't look like a button if you're not, like I say, with computers or or in the internet. But I don't know. It just kind of came to my mind, and I think it was. I might be mistaken, but I think it was Google.
Yeah. Well, another thing I think is kind of interesting when you were talking about the buttons looking like buttons. So here in the iOS 10 example, you've got the directions thing with 44 minutes on the slide you were just on. When you see stuff like that, they're not just making all buttons look like that. I think the intent there is to draw attention to the thing that you want the user to interact with next. So
Like a call to action kind of thing.
I'm sorry?
Like a call to action.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. So I think the way I would approach it is, whenever you're working on your user interfaces, finding, what is the next thing you want your user to do, and that's probably the thing that you should make look more like a button.
Yeah.
One thing I find ironic about this is they're trying to make things bigger and bolder, but what they did here in iOS 10 down at the bottom is they just made that font a whole hell of a lot smaller. I'm having a hard time. I know what it says, but if I didn't, I'd have a hard time reading it. Whereas I think what you have over there, if all they did was just drew a blue outline of a button, done, that would have been perfect.
Yeah, I didn't notice that. I would answer why they did that.
I think it has a lot to do with what you
So
said.
instead of background color, border color,
We
and
have all these
corner
people
radius.
working here. Let's swing back a little bit and then let's swing forward.
And I bet some of that too is, I've seen it with other things that totally unrelated to this, but you probably have a committee of people working on things. You know, a certain set of people are focused on what's on top there and totally ignoring what's on the bottom, and then it gets rolled out like this. And maybe when iOS 10 is finally done, they'll have that addressed. Who knows? But
You know, one thing I could say about that is it would be closer to your thumbnail. It's easier to access. I don't know.
That's true.
It's very small distance, but
yeah,
could make
but
a
still,
distance if you got smaller thumbs.
there's a lot of real estate inside that button to
Yeah.
jack up the font size
But-
too.
Yeah.
To your point, there's nothing you can interact with that's out of reach of the thumb if you're holding the phone low.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking in the case of get like
That's what you should do.
6
Here
plus.
they have all this empty space right here that's just kind of hanging.
Yeah.
But not here. It's all button.
I mean, it is empty space. It is hanging. I love iOS 9. The look. I really like. And I guess maybe I'm a little bit biased because I think as a developer, when someone comes with a design that is super basic, just drop the label, put it to the leading edge or whatever, and you're done. And then all of a sudden you have to add like all that. I don't know.
Well, I think it's definitely aesthetically better, but again, you look at the iOS 9 one, get your news in your inbox, no idea what it says below it. Even if that thing was fairly close to me, I don't have horrible eyesight, but it'd be something I'd have to kind of look at and focus in on. So I think there's definitely a happy medium in between
Sure.
those two there. But
Sure.
Maybe you're in your next swing.
Yeah.
They are just telling you, like you said, just click on blue. Normally the rest of it just blue.
well,
Sign me
especially
up.
in the car, I think the buttons are nice because now on my periphery, I don't have to look at it and aim for a small target. I can just kind of look and I see a big blue blob and I just click it. Now, if I'm driving, I probably don't care about a news app. So that's maybe something too they should consider, the apps that people are likely to interact with while driving.
Or distracted, basically.
Yeah, I mean, because a GPS app I think is a legitimate app where people
To
are
use while
doing-
driving. You might have it, mounted on your dashboard.
Right.
So it's totally.
a music app too. The music app I'm currently using uses gestures, which I think is good. I just don't always memorize all the gestures.
Right.
I'm kind of taking a different tact. Instead of gestures, I'm dividing my screen up into kind of a big grid. So I know if I want one action, I click on one side of it as opposed to the other. That's more appropriate for driving. It may not look pretty, but it's more functional. So I think Apple maybe needs to be a little looser with their interface guidelines to take in consideration what and when the app is going to be used.
Realistically,
Yeah.
instead of what we want in a perfect world, you don't look at your phone.
Or dare I say, maybe go a little more the route of Android and let people customize it a little bit more.
Which might be, the next iteration of the iOS.
Yeah. Of course, if they do that, then
Honestly, I don't
they
see that
copy
happening.
Google.
Not for a while. Apple wants it to look like they want it to look,
Yeah.
at least in the parts of the system that they control. Within your own apps, I mean, you can go nuts.
Right.
I haven't heard anyone getting nicked for a human interface guideline, like design side issue in probably years.
I think it happened when I first started, like, it was iOS 6, but maybe it was not iOS 7 they stopped. Because before they, like, nick you if you're like a 40-point button, it has to be 44. They were, like, super strict there for the first few years.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they were, I mean, if you're like a 30-point button, it's always a crapshoot. I think they're a little bit more flexible now with the, in general, 3D process, but yeah.
It's a little more, if you want your app to suck, sure, fine.
Yeah.
Well, and you can see the changes that have been made over time. They've definitely incented you to try and use the out-of-the-box stuff, right? I mean, there's a big push towards that. And when they come out with the next go-around, it makes it a lot easier to move ahead.
Yeah. Yes, it does. Which is why I wish more of our clients would be okay with that.
I always thought Apple's been pushing accessibility a lot lately. If you watch WWDC talks, even if no matter what the talk's about, they always mention make your apps accessible, right? There's always plugging that in. And during the design awards, they also had some blind guy come up and play with all the apps, and the app got a reward because it was so accessible. But if the company's gonna be that gonna be berating us about accessibility that much, it doesn't make sense for their design to be non-accessible. So it looks like they drank their own Kool-Aid and made it as accessible as possible.
I mean, Apple has historically been pretty proactive with accessibility. You know, with iOS 7, yeah, they kind of shot themselves in the foot a little bit on that. But overall, I think they've made huge strides in accessibility that, you know, the wider industry has sort of ignored.
That's why I think I won't go as far as doing what Android does, where you can just customize it to the nth degree. I do think there are probably some simple things that would make sense for Apple to do to allow a bit of customization. So, for example, one of the things I hated the most about the music app when Johnny got his hands on it was I just got used to that black with an orange on it. It was easy for me to see, especially when I'm in the car late at night. Then they go to that god-awful white with pink on it. You know, why can't I just go in there and maybe turn an inverse on where I get something on black?
That's about the time I switched to Spotify.
Well, that's why the big reason I went to cartoons, because now I can't do landscape anymore. That was the whole point of getting the big phone is, you know, I can put that thing on landscape and everything rotates to fit that. So they go and they do that with the, you know, at least the grid layout of the apps, and then they create apps that don't go into landscape, which doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I think the redesign Apple Music app does look a lot better. That playback control is gigantic. It's like twice as big as Spotify's is. So I think, I don't use it though, I use Spotify though. Looks like it'd be a lot better. But still does too many things though.
Mm-hmm. The screen right here is really interesting. I'm just thinking from a design perspective, like density is always a big concern of like a lot of the top designers. You know, have you guys heard of Tufte before? He wrote all the design books and he just talks about information density a lot. It seems like in a lot of the screens that are side by side, you know, the new design contains a lot less information. You know, what you said to do accessibility, but it just seems like it does run a little bit counter to some of the
So if you have a news
common
app,
design, you know, things that you.
So if you have a news app and you need to cram as much information as possible, as many articles as possible. Is making that font that big a good idea? I don't think so. But
I really want to scroll down.
I mean, when I'm using the news app,
it's still pretty blocky down there.
the way I tend to use it at first is like skim through, look for an interesting headline, and you know sometimes the picture will also impact my decision on whether or not to open the article. But then once I'm in it, you know, load me up.
It's pretty blocky here.
And an easy way to rectify that blockiness too is just like when I go into my Kindle or my Nook app, I got little a, medium A, big A. There could be somewhere around there that you could throw something like that in and it would just adjust the font. I don't think that's.
Well, they have that. That's the dynamic type thing. It's in the settings.
But you gotta go,
But
But
you
doesn't
gotta
that
do
do
it
it?
like system wide.
Yeah, well, that's part of the problem, isn't the
Except
dynamic?
for custom apps that ignore dynamic type.
But isn't
Yeah.
dynamic type
Every
though
app
where
I've worked on.
as you're trying to type into a confined space that it changes, or is it just?
I mean, it depends on how it's developed. Some of them are probably going to be, you know, in a container that's statically sized.
Yeah, I'm thinking more just
Yes, it
being able to set my font as small, medium, or large, and not have it vary depending on what gets pushed into the container. But
It didn't stop from doing it in Safari, right? When you put it in the reader view, you had the option of
Right.
increasing and decreasing the font.
Yeah.
So, yeah, why not propagate that further?
in fact, maybe that would be something to put in that control panel that
well,
pops
that's
up.
what it should be.
Yeah. Except
Because
then,
that's how it's in the Kindle. Like you just swipe
Yeah.
up or whatever, and then you change it from there.
You know, you could almost argue that with the older design, it was almost a shift of audience. It was less readable, but it was really poppy for kids. It was clean. It was cool. A lot of younger people liked it. And obviously, when you do that, you lose some of an older audience because it's not as usable. I'm thinking that if they're going in this direction, chances are they're going to keep going in this direction at least a little bit because they've obviously seen that there's somewhat of an issue.
Designers like Apple. There's a reason why. Any other thoughts? Want to do a thumbs up, thumbs down for approve or disapprove? Maybe. Who approves, who doesn't? I approve.
Overall,
Yeah.
Approve. Mostly approves. Meh. Meh.
Let's call Apple, tell them we approve.
So we got a question once we have it. I have it on this work phone. I have it on my personal phone yet. So
Yeah, I'll always vote for functionality and utility over prettiness, and I
Yeah.
think that's what you get here. But
Yeah. I agree.
yeah. I mean, for me, it's overall, I like it. The big blocky fonts.
yeah.
I
So
wish they
buttons
dialed
seem
that
like
back
a
a little
no-brainer.
bit.
Buttons seem like a no-brainer to me.
Yeah.
Font is too much. Obviously, there's a middle ground somewhere there, and they need to find it. But I think it's a step in the right direction. But
I'm just not sure if like the Maps app just if it had a bad design, it had a bad design. If you couldn't find the directions, I don't know if it required sort of the system-wide, sledgehammer here to make everything bigger. But I mean, I don't think it's a necessarily bad. We'll see.
in terms of the Maps app, I just wish it would work better.
the actual.
Yeah, like
Well,
get you where you want to
I
go.
don't know, free tangent, but the other day when we were going to the Anodyne coffee place, I clicked on the thing in the MS or the NS coders thing, and it put the pin there, but it didn't give me directions until I did it like 3 or 4 times. And then all of a sudden, I finally figured out, oh, you want to figure out how to get there. And instead, I always made that the starting point. I probably just did something wrong, but
I agree. When I started using FAK they tried to take me off a bridge at least twice, 2 different bridges. But I was driving and it said turn right, and it was just water to the right of me.
yeah, somebody just did that
It
recently.
got better a lot, very
They did
quickly
get a
though.
lot
I
better
mean,
after it first came
Yeah.
out.
they didn't waste a lot of time making it better.
And the other thing I find ironic too
Considering
is
the head
if I'm in
start
Safari
it's had.
and I click for directions, it takes me to Google Maps. I don't know why, but that's a different topic, I guess.
It might be something for that.
Usually
There's a preference.
the link. So it depends on how they set up the link. They can set it up to go into Google Maps if it's installed.
So like if you're using Google, hit the link.
I would have expected Safari to trump all.
Yeah, it sort of depends on like if the well, I'm guessing here, but I suspect that it depends on if the website developer, like if they set it up so when you tapped on it, it was actually linking to a Google map like on their website, if it was that kind of thing, versus Apple's data detectors working its magic in Safari and saying, hey, this looks like an address. So I suspect that that's probably
I
what
think you're
happened.
right.
So any other iOS 10 things you want to talk about besides design? Siri Kit.
Like they're using cards more. I think that's important.
So is that something that's similar to the WebOS that Palm had with their cards?
Not really.
No.
I mean, Apple has borrowed some of the design cues from that, I suppose, like with the task switching and that sort of thing. But when you're talking about cards, are you referring mostly to like this kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I don't know. I've seen a lot of it in material design, right? And I don't know. It makes sense. It's almost like pre-programmed in the human mind that a card is a separate entity from another card.
Mhm.
So I think it's a really smart direction to go to. It's logical. It makes
Yeah,
sense.
so notifications right now let us scoop things with a very skinny line. This takes up more space, but it's obviously things are grouped very, very neatly.
Has anyone worked on a Today extension?
What?
A Today extension? So like the weather up next, Siri app suggestions, those are all like the kinds of things that you might also find in the Today view.
In iOS 10, did they finally let you put that in landscape?
On the iPad.
Nope.
Well, you got a small one though. Well, I expect a little bit different out of the Plus because it's got that. I'm obsessed with landscape. Is yours a
Landscape on the big one.
Yeah, I guess I'll have to mount that in my car.
It's-
I used to, but it's got in the way of other controls.
This is the 06.
Okay. I've been reluctant to switch over because I'm in the middle of coding something, and if by some miracle I get it out in September before iOS 10 comes out, I don't want to have to wait for the new operating system and then push things out.
Hey, slightly different topic. New hardware coming out soon. What are people hearing?
iPhone 7, which will
Yeah.
remove the headphone jack and touch capacitive home button,
Yeah.
allegedly. I don't know.
Aren't they gonna have lightning to aux now or something?
That's the rumors.
I don't think they'll ship with that.
I think someone at least saw one online like
They'll charge $30 for it.
Those are
No, I think those are gonna be extra. I think you're either gonna get Bluetooth headphones automatically, or
I hope so.
That'd be pretty cool.
I don't see them shipping it with a dongle. That's not very Apple.
So what sounds like what might happen is an extra plus model, so like a plus plus, that has a like an extra camera lens or something. That the rumors for that something solid. It's something Apple would do. An iPhone Pro, yeah, that's what I keep hearing. I can see that they've made an iPad Pro. So
Where are the rumors now on that model getting the those 3 dots on the back that let you hook accessories up to it, like on the iPad Pro? I forget what they call that
Smart
thing.
connector.
Yeah, yeah, that thing. I thought they were going to put that on the iPhone Pro. Seems like every other rumor I see, it's in there, and then it's out. It's in there, it's out.
the headphone thing seems so massive. It seems unnecessary almost.
I kind of hope that they do get into the dual camera thing on the back of the phone, because it starts opening up sort of a wider world for augmented reality. So if you have 2 cameras with known focal lengths at a known distance apart from each other, you can do more math to better figure out what kinds of objects you're looking at. So in this past year, we did some work for the American Museum of Natural History, and it was an augmented reality piece where it's sort of a scavenger hunt kind of thing around the museum. So you go into the Hall of the Dinosaurs and like, oh, look for the Tyrannosaurus Rex like pelvis bone, and point at it. And so a lot of that kind of stuff would be easier or more reliable if you had 2 cameras on the back.
Some more Pokemon.
More Pokemon, yeah.
So the new Samsung Note 7 has 2 cameras in the front for the new retina scanner. Remember that? Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Now I'm hearing
It seems to work.
that's supposed to come out on iPhone 8.
Yeah.
Yeah, let those guys do it, because it seems like when they come out with a feature like that, it always ends up kind of backfiring on them in the first iteration.
I haven't seen it in person, but from the reviews of it, they say it works. It's not as fast as the home button, but every once in a while, my home button, for example, if I work out or I have something in my finger, it won't read it. So in those situations, I can see it's using my eyes. It'll be fine.
It just seems gimmicky.